Hello everybody. Obviously I am not Timur. Your usual half the battle host had some health problems. News of his illness reached me and it awakened HCC 788 from Odin's sleep. May is supposed to be dedicated to a main character. Scarlet won the fan poll, but it looked like main character May would have to be cancelled. That's when Timur had to turn to the B team. I was drawn out of retirement for one last mission. I thought I was out, but they pulled me back in. I'm getting too old for this shit. Without further ado, let's learn all we can about the G.I. Joe main character, Scarlet. The character we know as Scarlet evolved from sources predating 1980's G.I. Joe. In 1981, Larry Hama was working as an editor for Marvel Comics and looking for writing work. He was working on a new concept for a team led by the son of Nick Fury. It was to be called Fury Force. The small elite strike force consisted of 7 members with military weapons and code names. Fury Force had a secret base under the Chaplain's Assistance motor pool on Staten Island. For G.I. Joe fans, this all sounds familiar. One member of Fury Force was Lila Galil, codenamed Shadow. She was an intelligence specialist. Larry sketched her riding a motorcycle. At about the same time, the revival of G.I. Joe was underway. The legendary action figure from the 1960s had fallen into disuse. Fortunately, the Star Wars action figures produced by Kenner set a new standard for toys and vehicles. Reimagined at the 3 3/4 inch scale, G.I. Joe would soon be ready for toy shelves. In 1981, Ron Rudat developed designs for new military action figures in the same scale as Star Wars figures. The characters had specialties, such as infantry or machine gunner. One of those characters was a female master of stealth weapons. The initial sketches for the Master of Stealth Weapons borrowed a lot of elements from Princess Leia's look in Empire Strikes Back. She didn't have a name yet. Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics in the early 80s. He recounts a story of Marvel president Jim Galton meeting Hasbro CEO Stephen Hassenfeld at a charity fundraiser in 1981. Galton pitched Marvel for the creative development of the new G.I. Joe concept. Jim Shooter brought the project to the editors at Marvel, but they turned him down. None of them wanted to work on a toy book. Larry Hama was the last person asked and the only one to accept. G.I. Joe would be supported by a comic book published by Marvel Comics and written by Larry Hama. The comic book would be advertised with animated TV commercials, which would skirt the FCC regulations that limited the amount of animation that could be included in a toy ad. Larry's concept for Fury Force could be adapted for Hasbro's G.I. Joe project. The characters drawn by Ron Rudat that only had specialties would be given names and backstories. Larry wrote dossiers for the characters to help him keep track of them. From simple sketches, the members of G.I. Joe became fully fleshed out characters. Those dossiers would be edited to become the file cards printed on the toy packaging. The dossier for Scarlet had the heading Girl. There was a concern that boys would not buy action figures of female characters. The fact that one female character was included in G.I. Joe's first series was remarkable. Some elements from Fury Force's Shadow were folded into Scarlet. Like Shadow, Scarlet's primary specialty was intelligence. The light hair of Larry's original sketch became red. Ron's later sketches of Scarlet moved away from the Princess Leia look and adopted some elements from popular spy movies and TV shows. Most pre-production sketches of Scarlet had long hair, but the action figure would be produced with short hair, so the toy wouldn't require 2 pieces for the head. The final design featured a shooting vest with a rifle cushion on the right shoulder, a muscle-activated Derringer pistol on her wrist, a smoke grenade, a slingshot, throwing stars, a Bowie knife, and plastic explosives. We will look at all those details later. Before the toys could be distributed, the packaging had to be created. The packaging was designed by Werbin and Morrill, an independent design firm. The painted illustrations were done by Hector Garrido. Garrido's renderings of Scarlet had a similar look to another red-haired character in the Baroness book series, for which Garrido did the covers. With the characters designed, the comic book written, and the packaging ready, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero was ready to debut. 1982 saw the first wave of action figures, including Scarlet. The first series of figures had limited arm articulation and were thus called straight arm. Most of the figures of the first wave reused a lot of parts among them. Scarlet was the only figure from the initial release with all unique parts. The 1982 Cobra figures would also have unique parts, but they wouldn't be released until later in the year. Scarlet came with only one accessory, which the packaging called an XK1 power crossbow. This is an appropriate weapon for a master of silent weapons. One special thing about bows, crossbows, and spears in cartoons: they can contain explosives, giant nets, and many other magical devices. They are like Batman's utility belt. They can contain anything the plot requires. The crossbow has a bolt sculpted on. Scarlet seems to only have one shot. She has no other crossbow bolts on the figure or the accessory. Scarlet has the same articulation as other 1982 G.I. Joe figures: swivel neck, swivel and hinge at the shoulder, swivel at the elbow. O-ring construction allows movement at the torso. Legs move at the hip and hinge at the knees. Looking at the sculpt, design, and color of this first Scarlet figure, Ron Rudat's pre-production sketches can help us figure out what some of the details are supposed to be. The head does not have the greatest sculpt, but it was par for the time. She has short red hair. The arms are cast in a blue-gray plastic with painted tan gloves. Inside the right wrist is a silver-painted, muscle-activated derringer. It looks like it's supposed to spring forward into the hand. The left outside wrist has two silver-painted throwing stars. The torso has a tan vest with a blue-gray collar, the same color as the arms. There is a red checker pattern rifle cushion on the right shoulder. This would be perfect for a rifle, but Scarlet doesn't include a rifle. She has a crossbow that doesn't have a stock that would rest on the pad. This is a mismatch between the figure design and the accessory. On the left shoulder is a dark gray smoke grenade. There are sculpted on, unpainted zippers. The waist piece is the same tan color as the torso. There is a sculpted on, unpainted belt. On the back is a silver painted slingshot. I guess that counts as a silent weapon. The legs are the same blue-gray color as the arms with painted tan boots. The right leg has an unpainted utility pouch and silver-painted plastic-timed explosive. The left leg has a silver-painted Bowie throwing knife entrenching tool. It looks like a Bowie knife, of course, but entrenching tools usually have a shovel head. The tan boots have utility pouches on the inside and outside of the leg. Scarlet's feet are unique among nearly all G.I. Joe action figures from the entire line in that they do not have holes in the bottom of the feet for foot pegs. Foot pegs were used to stand the action figures, hold them on vehicles, and pose them for display. This is one instance where a woman had fewer holes in her body than the men. Larry Hama's dossier for The Girl was edited down to become the file card printed on the back of the packaging. This was an innovation in toy design. It gave children a backstory for the character and suggested modes of play. She was no longer just a girl, she was now counterintelligence. The role of counterintelligence is to prevent enemy efforts to gather information. Her file name was Shanna M. O'Hara from Atlanta, Georgia. Her name is a reference to the character Scarlett O'Hara from Margaret Mitchell's 1936 novel Gone with the Wind. The novel was made into a movie in 1939, starring Vivien Leigh and Clark Gable. The 1939 movie Gone with the Wind was a milestone in American cinema. It was a grand epic, in color, exhibiting the pinnacle of the art form at the time. It was also super racist and can eat my ass. Her primary military specialty is intelligence, the same as her earlier incarnation from Fury Force. The first paragraph is almost exactly the same as Larry Hama's dossier. The list of qualifications is slightly abbreviated, but is mostly carried over. One of her expert qualifications is with the garrote. Larry Hama noted, improvised garrotes became part of the Ranger and Commando training during World War II as a means of silent sentry neutralization. The second paragraph is almost entirely copied from the psychological profile on the dossier, very little editing. What was not included was the peer personality assessment. The dossier has a paragraph written by her teammate, Grunt, which basically says she assuaged all concerns about having a woman on the team as soon as they saw her perform in the field. This set the tone for a fierce, deadly member of the G.I. Joe team. No damsel in distress was she. However, just as with most women characters in boy-focused media, she was the romantic interest of one of the main male characters. In 1983, all of the figures released in 1982 were re-released with some updated articulation and parts. These are referred to by collectors as version 1.5. They are modified from version 1, but not updated enough to call them version 2. They added new articulation on the arm called Swivel Arm Battle Grip. The new swivel at the bicep allowed the figures to hold their weapons with a two-hand grip. Thus, Scarlet's arms were reworked to accommodate the new articulation. Version 1.5 was available in 1983 and 1984 and was discontinued for 1985. Despite the popularity of Scarlet in the animated series and the comic book, she did not get a new version for 11 years. Scarlet version 2 was released in 1993 as part of the Ninja Force subset. This was a radical update from the 1982 figure. Ninja Force was a sub-team within G.I. Joe consisting of martial arts experts. With Scarlett's background in martial arts, it makes sense that she would be in Ninja Force, even though she wasn't a ninja. Ninja Force figures had action features, which required different construction. Scarlet version 2 was not an O-ring figure like the first version. Scarlet version 2 has a spring kick action called K-toe kick. The action feature limited her leg articulation, so this figure has less posability than version 1. Ninja Force Scarlet had rooted doll hair, which allowed her to have long hair for the first time. Her uniform was bright green, with gold accents and a soft goods sash on her hip. The accessories were all yellow because they came on a yellow plastic frame and would have to be cut out by the buyer. One of those accessories was a figure stand, so Scarlet finally had holes in her feet. The entire body of Scarlet version 2, except for the head, was reused to make the Street Fighter II Chun-Li action figure, also released in 1993. Toy companies were reluctant to sell action figures of female characters in a primarily boy-targeted line. This was the result of the failure of the G.I. Nurse, released in the original G.I. Joe line in 1967. That fear was partially alleviated with the success of Star Wars and the inclusion of Princess Leia action figures. Jim Shooter suggested that Hasbro package the women characters with vehicles. That didn't happen with Scarlet, but it did happen with CoverGirl in 1983. She was the driver of the Wolverine. In the vintage G.I. Joe toy line that ran from 1982 to 1994, there were far fewer women action figures than men. Besides Scarlet in 1982, the line included CoverGirl in 1983, the Baroness in 1984, Lady J in 1985, Zarana in 1986, Jinx in 1987, and Scarlet version 2 in 1993. Between 1987 and 1993, there were none. Scarlet was the first and the last. The women characters continued to appear in media even when their action figures were no longer sold in stores. Since Scarlet was a main character in G.I. Joe, she naturally had a lot of action figures released over the years. Not as many as Snake Eyes, but the character carried through to later iterations of G.I. Joe. Yojo.com lists 16 figures in the 1/18th scale, which doesn't count figures in other scales. I can't review all of them, but I can cover most of them. I will cover later figures with the media they supported, but here are a few notables I wanted to mention now. They are important, but they weren't released congruent to a movie or TV show. Not long after the G.I. Joe A Real American Hero line ended in 1994, nostalgia prompted a revisit to the brand. In 1997, Hasbro released the Stars and Stripes Forever set, which was intended to be a retro-style repackaging of the early action figures. Unfortunately, not all the molds of the first-run figures were available. Compromises were made. Some of the set looked nothing like the originals. Fortunately, the mold for 1983's Scarlet version 1.5 was available and was recolored and reused for Stars and Stripes Forever. G.I. Joe nostalgia ramped up again in 2007 when the 25th anniversary figures were released. Scarlet version 8 was issued in a 5-pack set and was later released as a single carded figure. These 25th anniversary figures had updated sculpting and articulation, but had character designs reminiscent of the vintage figures. There was another leap forward for G.I. Joe in 2020 with the launch of the 6-inch action figure line called G.I. Joe Classified. The first classified Scarlet figure was released in 2020 with a uniform loosely based on her version 1 uniform, but with updated details and weapons. There was another classified Scarlet figure that was tied to a movie, which we will look at later. G.I. Joe was not only popular in the United States, the toys were released in various incarnations internationally. In the UK, the Scarlet version 1 mold was recolored to make the Action Force character Quarrel in 1983. Quarrel was a motorcycle driver packaged with the Action Force version of the Ram motorcycle. This was an unintended callback to Fury Force's Shadow, which Larry Hama drew on a motorcycle. An actual Scarlet figure was released for the UK Action Force line. Action Force Scarlet from 1985 looked very similar to the US version. Her origin was changed. Action Force Scarlet was from Belgium, not the United States. In Argentina, the Scarlet version 1 mold was used to create the character Glenda. Glenda had blonde hair and a silver and blue uniform. Glenda was a helicopter pilot, though the figure was not included with a helicopter vehicle. Oddly, her real name wasn't Glenda, that was her code name. Her real name was Jane Mulligan. As a callback to this famous international variation, a 6-inch Glenda figure was included as a stretch goal for the G.I. Joe HasLab Dragonfly helicopter. Super 7 also debuted a Glenda reaction figure at JoeFest 2024. In Brazil, the Scarlet version 1 mold was recolored and used to make the Comandos Emassao figure Athena. The Brazilian version was similar to the US release, but the tan parts of the uniform were recolored white. We will talk about a lot of other Scarlet figures, but they need some context. First, we need to talk about how the character was portrayed in media. The earlier iterations of G.I. Joe in the 1960s and 70s had supporting comic books, but they were not the full universe G.I. Joe received in the 1980s and 90s. In 1965, DC Comics published DC Showcase number 54, featuring G.I. Joe. This was a collection of war stories only loosely tied to the toys, but there was an ad for the G.I. Joe action figure in the comic book. In the 1970s, some comic booklets were included with cassette tapes for the G.I. Joe Adventure Team. It wasn't until G.I. Joe reached Marvel that it became a comic book powerhouse. Marvel President Jim Galton convinced Hasbro CEO Stephen Hassenfeld to allow Marvel to work on the creative concept for the new G.I. Joe toy series. As noted before, Larry Hama was an editor at Marvel looking for writing work and was the only one who didn't turn down the offer to work on G.I. Joe. He wrote the plot for the first issue, which was accepted by Hasbro. The comic book became a huge success and, for a time, was Marvel's top subscribed title. Larry Hama went on to write most of the 155 issues published by Marvel Comics, along with a spin-off series called G.I. Joe Special Missions. Scarlet appeared in the very first issue and was in all of the first 22 issues of the series. She was one of the most frequently featured characters in the series, even well after the Scarlet action figure was discontinued. She also appeared in the final issue of the Marvel series, number 155. The first Marvel G.I. Joe comic had a main story titled Operation Lady Doomsday. Scarlet was part of the team assigned to rescue Dr. Adele Burkhart from Cobra. Scarlet was also in a second story included in issue number 1, titled Hot Potato. The Joes try to struggle a secret tape out of an unnamed Middle Eastern country. A wounded Scarlet stays behind while Rock and Roll and Snake Eyes continue the mission. In the second issue, Scarlet was included in a team tasked with investigating some strange goings-on in the Arctic. She continued to be a regular feature in the first year of the series. In issue number 21, she became even more prominent. G.I. Joe issue number 21 was the famous silent issue, titled Silent Interlude. According to Larry Hama, the original script was lost, so he wrote and drew the entire 22-page story in 3 days. To save time, it was decided to do the issue without dialogue, thus silent. The story was told entirely with sequential art. In Silent Interlude, Scarlet is captured by the Cobra ninja Storm Shadow and brought to Cobra's castle base. Snake Eyes infiltrates the base to rescue her. It is revealed that Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow have the same tattoo on their right forearms, but their connection remains a secret for now. In issue number 26, Snake Eyes: The Origin Part 1, the reason for the matching tattoos was finally revealed. Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are part of the same ninja clan, the Arashikage. In issue number 27, Snake Eyes: The Origin Part 2, Snake Eyes and Scarlet have a special connection that turns into a romantic relationship. Scarlet continued to feature prominently as a main character in the comic book, a mission leader, and a partner for Snake Eyes. In issue number 94, Snake Eyes got plastic surgery to fix his disfigured face. The Baroness caught up with him when he was at his most vulnerable. Scarlet, trying to protect him, was shot in the head by the Baroness. The shot left Scarlet in a coma. It would have been the height of irony if her comatose status had been announced by Duke. Oh, but we haven't got to that part yet. That will make sense later. Her sister, Siobhan O'Hara, wanted to terminate Scarlet's life support. This led to a distraught Snake Eyes uttering his only word, Scarlet. He referred to her by her code name rather than her real name. I guess they're not on a first-name basis. Scarlet was a main character, remember. She couldn't die. She revived from her coma in issue number 103. She made a full recovery and was able to live a long life of blissful fulfillment. All this time, Scarlet maintained the look of her version 1 action figure. In the 90s, she changed to her version 2 Ninja Force uniform. In issue number 136, she was assigned to infiltrate Cobra by faking a defection. In issues number 137 to 138, to test her loyalty, Cobra Commander assigned Scarlet to assassinate Hawk. Hawk and Stalker faked their deaths in the assassination attempt. Snake Eyes attacked and wounded Scarlet, which convinced Cobra Commander of her loyalty. In issue number 141, the ruse was up. Scarlet recovered from the wound from Snake Eyes, escaped, and was immediately put back to duty for the G.I. Joe team. Near-fatal wounds are great for drama, but a main character must always fully recover to live a long life of blissful fulfillment. Scarlet's final appearance in the Marvel Comics run was in the final issue of G.I. Joe, number 155. That story was focused on Snake Eyes, but Scarlet's presence in the final issue means she bookended the entire series. You may recall there were Scarlet action figures outside of the United States. She had international comic book appearances too. In the UK, the comics Battle Action Force and Action Force included a combination of original stories and reprints of the US comics. Quarrel, the recolored Scarlet clone, appeared in Action Force comics on her motorcycle. The character was from Switzerland. Scarlet also appeared appeared, the Scarlet that looked like the original US character. She appeared in both original Action Force stories and in reprints of the US G.I. Joe stories. Action Force had both the clone Scarlet and the real Scarlet. Action Force had its own continuity and characters independent from the US comic series. Sometimes part of the US continuity could be included, but the UK characters had different origins and sometimes different designs. Cobra had an entirely different origin. Different characters were emphasized. The Action Force stories really are their own things, independent of the US run. Back in the USSA, following the end of the Marvel Comics run of G.I. Joe comic books, the license was dormant for a few years. Starting in 2001, Devil's Due picked up the license and started publishing new G.I. Joe comics. The series, sometimes called Volume 2, was initially distributed by Image Comics. The Devil's Due series picked up the Marvel continuity, but without Larry Hama at the helm. The first issue has story and layouts by Josh Blaylock, pencils by Steve Kurth, and inks by John Larter. From what I can tell, the Devil's Due series was well received. The first issue, Reinstated, had a cover homage to G.I. Joe Yearbook No. 2, and our girl Scarlet was on the cover. In an updated storyline, G.I. Joe and Scarlet's relationship was on the rocks because Snake Eyes left Scarlet shortly before their planned wedding. Although Larry Hama didn't start out writing G.I. Joe Volume 2, he did eventually write for Devil's Due, including the G.I. Joe Declassified series. Devil's Due produced a one-shot Scarlet Declassified, written by Mike O'Sullivan. That issue followed Scarlet's story from childhood, where she learned martial arts at a young age. She studied pre-law, then joined the Army. She got her Scarlet nickname in airborne school. It was an actual in-universe reference to Gone with the Wind. Later, she went to the FBI and investigated a weapons manufacturer who turned out to be Destro. This led to her joining the G.I. Joe team. Devil's Due had the G.I. Joe license from 2001 to 2008, after which it was taken over by IDW. The IDW series, like its predecessor, restarted the G.I. Joe story continuity at the end of the Marvel run. Devil's Due stories were declared to be a separate timeline and given the label Disavowed. It's kind of disrespectful if you think about it. All those stories were undone and explicitly disavowed. IDW picked up the license in 2008 ahead of the anticipated G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra movie to be released in 2009. In 2010, it was announced that Larry Hama would be writing the new series. Unlike Volume 2, which started with a new issue number 1, Larry's IDW series would pick up the numbering where it left off, after Marvel's issue number 155. The first release was issue number 155 and a half, as part of Free Comic Book Day in May 2010. Since Scarlet was one of Larry Hama's main characters, of course she featured prominently in the IDW run. In issue number 156, the story starts with martial law declared in the United States, enforced by security forces controlled by Cobra. Duke goes to Snake Eyes' cabin in the High Sierras, where he helps Snake Eyes and Scarlet overcome an attack by Red Ninjas. The G.I. Joe series from IDW featured a number of artists during its long run, but many issues were drawn by S.L. Gallant. Gallant started his run in issue number 161. Starting with issue number 171, Scarlet got a special honor, featuring in the top left corner of the cover with the issue number. In the IDW storyline, Snake Eyes was killed in issue number 113. In a battle against Serpentor, Duke threw a grenade, which Serpentor quickly threw back. Snake Eyes grabbed the grenade, ran it back, and blew up Serpentor, which also killed Snake Eyes. We've already established that main characters can't die. You don't get more main character-y than Snake Eyes. Through a series of elaborate and improbable science fiction mechanisms, he would return to live a long life of blissful fulfillment. In issue number 300, Dr. Mindbender created a clone of Snake Eyes, effectively bringing him back to life. When Scarlet found out, she parachuted to Cobra Island to be reunited with her old dead boyfriend. The IDW license concluded in 2022 with issue number 300, with Larry Hama still writing it. Since Scarlett was in that final IDW comic, she survived 300 issues of G.I. Joe continuity starting in 1982. She bookended both series. After the end of IDW's run, the G.I. Joe license would be picked up by Skybound, an imprint of Image Comics founded in 2010 by Robert Kirkman, the creator of The Walking Dead. Skybound would have two separate continuities for G.I. Joe, and this time the old one wouldn't be disavowed. G.I. Joe would have a shared universe with the Transformers called the Energon universe. Since Transformers appeared in Larry Hama's G.I. Joe comics for Marvel, I guess they're both shared universes with Transformers. Additionally, Larry Hama could continue his series, picking up with issue number 301 in November 2023. Skybound's number 301 picked up right where IDW's number 300 left off, with the Joes on Cobra Island, Scarlet reunited with the now-living Snake Eyes, and Serpentor ready to activate a super-secret weapon. Scarlet had her own miniseries in the Energon universe. She was tasked with infiltrating the mysterious Arashikage clan. I don't want to go too deeply into the Skybound series because it is still ongoing and it is early days. As of now, you can go to your local comic shop and pick up the latest issues. Federal regulations at the time restricted how much animation could be in an advertisement for a toy, but the regulations did not apply to advertisements for a publication. Instead of making full animated commercials for the toy, Hasbro would make animated commercials for the comic book. In a roundabout way, the commercials were also for the toys. Loophole! Scarlett's first animated appearances were in TV commercials. The very first commercial for G.I. Joe action figures featured an animated clip of Scarlet along with some of the other Joes. Because of the regulations on the amount of animation that could be used in television commercials, those clips were very brief. But there were a few more animated clips in later toy commercials. The first toy commercial mostly featured images of the action figures. In the ad for the first issue of the comic book, we got more animation of Scarlet. Deregulation of children's television, which started in 1981, led to a flood of toy-based cartoon shows starting in 1983. G.I. Joe was one of those shows to launch in 1983. Now, 30-minute ads could be animated in the guise of a television show. The first 5-part G.I. Joe miniseries aired on American television in 1983. Originally, it was just called G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, but it has since been called The Mass Device to distinguish it from other animated episodes. The miniseries was produced by Sunbow Productions, which was established by the advertising agency Griffin Bacall in 1980. It is telling that the company that produced the animated series was owned by an advertising agency. The model sheets for animated Scarlet were done by famous comic book artist Russ Heath, who also drew an issue of the G.I. Joe comic book. The first episode aired September 12, 1983. Scarlet appeared in the first episode. Just as with the comic book, she was present at the beginning of the animated series. Scarlet's voice was provided by B.J. Ward. Betty Jean Ward was born September 12, 1944 in Wilmington, Delaware. The first episode of G.I. Joe aired on her birthday. She began television acting and voice work in the late 1970s. She married movie director Gordon Hunt in 1995. Gordon Hunt's daughter from a previous marriage is actress Helen Hunt. Scarlet is Helen Hunt's stepmom. In the first episode of the miniseries, Scarlet is set up as an apparent love interest for Duke. She showed her affection by nearly killing him with a Sky Striker. They're so cute, those pranksters. It was clear that Scarlet and Duke had some kind of connection before the series. She had some affection for Snake Eyes too, as seen in episode 2 when Snake Eyes apparently sacrificed himself to save the team from radiation. The Sunbow era ended with G.I. Joe the movie in 1987. The movie was not released theatrically. It premiered on television in the U.S. on April 18, 1987. Scarlet was in the movie, but she was less prominent than she was in earlier TV episodes. It was originally intended for Duke to die in the movie. After the backlash to Optimus Prime's death in the Transformers movie, Hasbro got cold feet. Instead, when Duke was severely injured in a fight with Serpentor, an awkwardly dubbed line from Scarlet declared that Duke had gone into a coma.
Yo, Joe. He's gone into a coma.
That line was not in the original screenplay. There was even a funeral scene scripted which did not make it into the movie. Of course, Duke fully recovered to live a long life of blissful fulfillment. Following the 1987 movie, the Sunbow Productions G.I. Joe series was canceled. A couple years later, it was resumed by Deke Entertainment. It was cheaper and lower quality than the Sunbow series. In 1989, when Deke picked up the series, the first Scarlet action figure was long out of circulation, and the second version had not yet been released. Because of this, Scarlet did not appear in the Deke series very often, and when she did, she rarely had lines. It is unknown who did the voice of Scarlet in the Deke series. In the Season 2 episode Channel, Duke and Scarlet's relationship is cemented when we see her shopping with Duke in London.
Because women be shopping.
They are wearing their battle uniforms for some reason. The episode was set in London, which gave them a chance to chew through some British tropes. The depiction of London is not entirely accurate. Some of it is sort of okay. I wouldn't use this episode as a travel guide. It did have a nice portrayal of the late Queen Elizabeth II.
For no matter how silly the idea of having a queen might be to us, as Americans we must be gracious and considerate hosts.
The Deke series mercifully expired in 1991. As with the comic book, G.I. Joe in animation was dormant for a few years. In 2003, a new CGI animated movie called Spy Troops was released on DVD. This was early CGI, so it looks pretty primitive now. It was released September 27, 2003. It was written by Larry Hama and directed by Dale Carman. Scarlet was voiced by Lisa Ann Bailey. It is impressive that they got Larry Hama involved in writing for animation. Spy Troops was followed by another CGI animated direct-to-DVD movie, Valor vs. Venom. It was released on September 14, 2004, written by Judith Reeves-Stevens and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, and directed by Dale Carman. Scarlet was again voiced by Lisa Ann Bailey. There were multiple Scarlet action figures that were tied in with the Valor vs. Venom movie. Version 4 from 2004 was released in a 2-pack with Cobra Sand Scorpion. Version 6 from 2004 was a single-carded figure in the Valor vs. Venom packaging. I guess you had to buy your Venom separately. Version 6 reused the mold from version 4 in different colors. Version 7 from 2004 was in another 2-pack with switch gears. It also used the mold from version 4 and 6 with desert colors. After Valor vs. Venom, in 2005, there was a total rework of G.I. Joe toys and media. G.I. Joe Sigma 6 was a series of anime-inspired 8-inch action figures. Well, some of them were 8 inches, others were 2.5 inches. It was a whole fiasco that wasn't well received by collectors. The Sigma 6 animated series was an anime-inspired hybrid of 2D and 3D animation produced by 4Kids Productions and Gonzo Studio. It had 2 seasons continuing the story from Spy Troops and Valor vs. Venom. A DVD called First Strike recut the first 5 episodes into one continuous movie. The Sigma 6 animated series, like the toys, was not well received by fans and was canceled before the final 5 episodes aired. There were multiple voice actors for Sigma 6 Scarlet, at least 2. Amy Birnbaum and Veronica Taylor. IMDb also credits Wendy Gaunt as the voice of Scarlet for 5 episodes. After the failure of Sigma 6, G.I. Joe's animated future was dim. Fortunately, 2009 would be a big year. G.I. Joe Resolute was a series of 11 webisodes that were compiled into an hour-long movie that aired on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim. A preview was shown at the 2008 G.I. Joe convention. Resolute was a departure from previous attempts to revive G.I. Joe. It was a much more mature take with a TV-14 rating. Of course, Scarlet was in it, voiced by Gray Griffin. Unlike Sigma 6, Resolute was well received by fans. I thought it was very good except for one thing. There was always a disconnect between the comic books and the animated series regarding Scarlet's romantic partner, with the comic book pairing her with Snake Eyes and the animated series pairing her with Duke. The two interpretations usually did not cross. Fans had their preferences.
Resolute features a scene in which Scarlet seems to explicitly reject Snake Eyes in favor of Duke. This struck me as an unnecessary and pointed rejection of the comic book fans. It's fine to pick one, but you don't have to give a middle finger to the other.
In 2010, Scarlet action figure version 13 was included in a 7-pack of figures based on the Resolute animation. With the success of Resolute, G.I. Joe needed a more kid-friendly animated series. In 2010, we got yet another iteration of G.I. Joe on TV, G.I. Joe Renegades. It aired on Hasbro's TV channel, The Hub. It had 26 episodes over 2 years, all considered Season 1. They were released on 2 DVDs as Season 1 Volume 1 and Season 1 Volume 2. The G.I. Joe concept was entirely restructured, with the Joes as fugitives on the run and trying to clear their names. It was reminiscent of the A-Team. Scarlet was in the series, voiced by Natalia Sigliuti. There has been some criticism of the animation style, which was angular and simplified. The show was unceremoniously canceled by The Hub before Season 2. We did get a Scarlet action figure out of it. Scarlet version 14 was released in 2011 with Renegades packaging. As one of G.I. Joe's most important characters, of course, Scarlet appeared in live action. A live Scarlet appeared in a 1993 TV commercial for G.I. Joe toys released that year. She was in her version 2 Ninja Force uniform. There was a longer appearance and a speaking part for Scarlet in a 1993 TV commercial for Ninja Force. Scarlet's big screen debut was in the 2009 movie G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. It was a big-budget, wide-release movie starring Channing Tatum, Marlon Wayans, and Sienna Miller, directed by Stephen Sommers. Scarlet was played by Rachel Nichols. This time, Scarlet was in a relationship with neither Snake Eyes nor Duke. Instead, Duke had history with the Baroness. The reception for The Rise of Cobra was mixed, and box office returns were modest. It wasn't helped by the fact that the 2007-2008 writer's strike resulted in a rushed script for the movie. At least we got a couple Scarlet action figures out of it. Version 11, Desert Ambush, was released in 2009 on Rise of Cobra packaging. Version 12, Covert Operations, was also released in 2009 on Rise of Cobra packaging. Scarlet did not appear in the sequel to Rise of Cobra, 2013's G.I. Joe Retaliation. G.I. Joe took a long break from live-action movies after Retaliation. In 2021, Snake Eyes' G.I. Joe Origins was released. As the title would suggest, the movie was an all-new continuity focusing on Snake Eyes before he joined the G.I. Joe team. The Snake Eyes movie ran into trouble from the beginning, when its release date was pushed back from March 27, 2020 to October 16, 2020. Then it had to be pushed out even more. It wasn't a writer's strike this time, it was a pandemic. We got a new Scarlet, played by Samara Weaving. When the movie got its long-awaited release, it flopped pretty hard. It was a box office disaster, making only $40 million worldwide on an $88 million budget. The Snake Eyes movie gave us a few action figures, including Scarlet. By 2020, G.I. Joe figures had shifted to the 6-inch scale with the Classified series. We already talked about the first Scarlet Classified figure. There was also a Scarlet Classified figure based on the movie, released in 2021. It had a face sculpt in the likeness of the actress. I personally liked the action figures more than the movie.
There was talk about a follow-up G.I. Joe team movie, but the failure of Snake Eyes ended that pretty quickly.
JoeCon was the annual G.I. Joe convention that was started by Hasbro in 1994. It was a yearly reunion for the G.I. Joe fan community. It ended in 2018 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Fans now gravitate to the annual Joe Fest in Augusta, Georgia. As you would expect for conventions, cosplay is a popular activity. The most prominent G.I. Joe cosplay group is The Finest, established in 2007. Scarlet is a popular character to cosplay and is often seen in photo shoots. Joe Colton, a popular G.I. Joe cosplayer, dressed as Scarlet at her first JoeCon in 2010. G.I. Joe became a popular franchise as video games were also becoming popular. Of course, Hasbro would have to exploit the gaming market with the G.I. Joe game. Unfortunately, the timing was less than ideal. The first G.I. Joe game was the Atari 2600 cartridge G.I. Joe Cobra Strike from 1983. Scarlet was not in the game. In fact, there were no recognizable characters in the game.
1983 was not a good year for video games. The G.I. Joe game came out, but it was also the year of the great North American home video game crash. Once seen as the wave of the future, the bottom fell out of the home video game console market, and it didn't rebound for a couple years.
In 1985, there was a G.I. Joe PC game released on diskette for the Commodore 64, published by Epix. For the first time, Scarlet was a playable character. G.I. Joe was revived for video game consoles with the 1991 Nintendo Entertainment System game produced by Taxan. Scarlet was not a playable character in that one. In 1992, G.I. Joe got an arcade game cabinet produced by Konami. It was an on-the-rails third-person shooter. Scarlet was a playable character again. There was a game supporting the 2009 G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra movie published by Electronic Arts. The game had the same name as the movie. Since Scarlet was in the movie, she was a playable character. Following the refresh of the G.I. Joe brand with the classified series, G.I. Joe Operation Blackout was released October 13, 2020. Developed by Iguana Bee and Fairplay Labs, published in North America by Game Mill Entertainment. It was a team-based third-person shooter. Scarlet was a playable character, and her design was based on her first classified action figure. It was not well received, with low player and critic ratings. I remember picking this up and being underwhelmed by it. Scarlet started as just the girl in G.I. Joe. It was a risk to even release a single woman character in a toy line marketed toward boys. I say marketed toward boys because G.I. Joe had plenty of girl fans. Scarlet had something to do with it. Larry Hama confirmed the impact Scarlet had on fans. I used to get a lot of letters from girls about the fact that she was never treated any differently from any of the guys. Scarlet never stood around holding her hands to her head going, "Eek!" That doesn't sound exceptionally progressive, but the portrayal of women characters in any media targeted at boys in that era was pretty bad. It was a big leap forward to have a character that wasn't a stupid stereotype. Everyone involved with the creation of Scarlet, Ron Rudat, Larry Hama, B.J. Ward, and many others, should be proud of their work. Scarlet appeared in most iterations of G.I. Joe. Not all, but most. She remained an important character even when there was no Scarlet action figure to sell. She was in the most recent G.I. Joe movie. She will likely remain important in the future. She is a fan favorite and a main character.
That was Half the Battle's entry for Main Character May in 2025, done by me, HCC788. I know I'm not Timmer, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. I can't do it like your usual host, but I did the best I could. Usually Timmer does a series of videos throughout the month of May, and this is just one. Thanks for watching, and hey, why not like, share, and subscribe if that's your thing. And subscribe to the Patreon so you can vote on things like this. I now turn it back over to the Timster. I hope he gets well soon.